This is TWiT.
Let's talk about let's
Photoshop?
Well, we're going to talk about Photoshop. Yeah. So this is Rob's story, and I've seen this floating around too. Apparently, there's some big news about Photoshop. What's going on, Rob?
So personally, I was a Photoshop user years ago, but personally, I left Photoshop long before I even left Windows. The licensing was a pain, and I just found that many open source solutions got the job done just as well for me. I guess my use case was image editing for website design. So, maybe there are some other use cases out there where open source doesn't work for them, but I have no clue what those are. I mean, you can edit an image. What else are you going to do with the image editor besides edit an image? If you can make it look any way you want it in open source, I don't know, maybe you can do a little easier in Photoshop, but whatever. So, for some, the inability to run Photoshop, at least without a bunch of workarounds on Linux, has been a deal breaker for them. But just to be clear, this isn't and never was a Linux problem. It's always been an Adobe problem, and them not caring enough about their users and wanting to be where their users want to be. So, they just always want to, they don't want to invest in the Linux ecosystem. And like many other things, Linux, even though it isn't a Linux problem, Linux has found a way and became the solution. So recently here, a developer who goes by the name of PhialsBasement, that's spelled PHIALS Basement, so PhialsBasement, has submitted a set of wine patches that finally let the official Adobe Creative Cloud installer for Windows run on Linux, which means you can install Adobe Photoshop 2021 and Photoshop 2025 directly into a wine prefix instead of doing the old install in Windows and then copy over the files workaround that apparently existed for some time here. And apparently this, you were able to install it before 2018, but they changed their installer to rely on some Windows thing. So the fixes address installer breakages tied to wine incompatibilities around MS-XML3 and MS-HTML, plus some JavaScript XML handling that Adobe's installers rely on. With the patched wine, the installer can complete and Photoshop can be launched. In terms of real world results, so far they're saying the word is out there that Photoshop 2021 is reported to run butter smooth, with one noted issue being drag and drop. And it's suggesting maybe that's actually a Wayland issue that needs to get fixed, but I don't know. I don't think they know yet. Stop blaming things on Wayland. But then Photoshop 2025 appears to be a little more hit and miss, depending on the setup. So, expectations should be measured. If you're going for it, maybe go for the 2021 version right now and don't upgrade yet. Right now, these patches, they're not merged in the upstream wine yet, but they were first submitted in Valve's downstream ecosystem, but the path forward is upstream acceptance first. Then, if it lands, it could later be backported into Proton or ported back into Proton. If you want to try it today, you'll need to use the developer's patched wine build, either by compiling wine yourself with the patches applied or grabbing pre-built binaries from their GitHub. But there are bigger implications beyond just Photoshop. The developer has reported progress with Adobe's broader installers, with most Adobe apps installing. While a couple I'm not in the Adobe ecosystem, so I never heard of these. I had to look these up to make sure they really were Adobe things, but a couple like Adobe XD and Adobe Fresco. I guess if you know what they are, if you use them, you know what they are, but I don't know. I don't feel like supporting Adobe myself, and anytime soon until they, change their ways. They're kind of one of those companies I'd rather not give any of my money to. But if you have a copy or some reason you want to support them, give it a try. I'd love to hear how it works for you. Or if you still don't want to run Photoshop, maybe later on in the show, Ken can offer you another alternative solution that's somebody maybe thinks is the best option.
All right. Interesting that it finally works. I'm trying to remember, once upon a time, there were, and I thought it was Adobe products, they were messing with like the Windows boot records for anti-piracy measures. Was that Adobe? I can't remember.
That sounds like something I remember reading Sony was doing.
Well, I mean, Sony was kind of the OG of that with their BMG rootkit.
I don't recall anything like that, but
somebody was. Maybe I'll find it during while somebody else is covering a story. But it's neat that Photoshop is now there and now working, and a good portion of the professional world still relies on that piece of software. So it is a welcome thing, I'm sure, for those professionals to be able to use it on their Linux systems.
That it could afford to pay for it.
Well,
that's why I went to GIMP.
Yeah, there you go. There's a reason that some of those alternatives are out there. But if you're making money with it, you probably can afford to pay for it.
It's
Jeff?
Well, I was going to say, it's one of those things where if you really are a power user, like you said, making money, the open source does not, it won't fulfill all the needs.
And it depends. It depends upon what you're doing.
Define all the needs. I was making money doing website design, and GIMP worked just fine for all my image editing needs.
There are certainly some things for photo editing that Photoshop is going to be the way to go. When you get into things like digital art, though, something like Krita, or I forget the other name. There's a couple of those.
Darktable?
No, not Darktable. There's a couple of the drawing apps, the open source drawing apps, that are like considered to be some of the best in the business. And so real professionals really do use those. GIMP is sort of on the edge compared to Photoshop because
well, when
Photoshop is the standard.
When I switched from Photoshop to GIMP, everything wasn't the same. It didn't do it all the same, but I could make my images look how I wanted them to look, and that's all I needed. I mean, what else do you have to do?
Well, there's a lot of professionals though that say that there isn't a replacement for Photoshop or other
that sounds like a
editing
issue.
tools. That's like LTT has talked about in the past. They've tried to get off Adobe, and they've tried to find other programs, and they can't find anything that handles their workflow. It comes
down to your workflow.
It comes down to workflow. It also comes down to things like color grading is one of the ones, because Adobe puts a lot of effort into making sure that you can the colors on your monitor will match the colors on the paper. That sort of thing, and that's
printing.
That's printing, but also like HDR upload to YouTube, pushing video out to cinema. I mean, not like the super professional workflows. There's just not a whole lot of support for some of those in these open source tools.
And that's what I'm talking about as far as just the real heavy duty users that a lot of the stuff. And I've used the example of like Excel, like Google Sheets, LibreOffice, a lot of that stuff, the worksheets work fine. But for example, in my professional life, I have to use Excel and I can't even use the web version because it doesn't have all the tools I need. But I'm kind of more an extreme user. And that's the groups that, might switch over to Linux now, because I've heard a lot of different professionals talking about Photoshop or the Adobe Creative Cloud being one of the big blocks to actually doing the Linux conversion. And I've heard a lot of people say, if I could run this on Linux, I would switch.
And you guys pick on me saying I'm the Windows guy. I think we had the Microsoft fanboy in the bottom right corner here.
I think it's not so much a fanboy as a captive.
Yeah, I think so. If you enjoyed this clip, be sure to check out the Untitled Linux Show. You can find us in your favorite podcasting app or subscribe to our YouTube channel down in the links below. See you there.